Good afternoon and welcome to the Vale of Glamorgan Cabinet meeting taking place today on the 5th of September 2024. I'm Councillor Bronwyn Brooks, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Sustainable Places, and I'm chairing the meeting today on behalf of the Leader of the Vale of Glamorgan Council and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources, Councillor Liz Burnett, who sends her apologies for the meeting today. May I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants be there in the chamber or attending remotely, please mute themselves when not speaking, and then this will avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if attending in the chamber, or use the raise hand function if you're attending remotely. And please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function, and this is for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and or to grab the attention of myself as chair or the Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chair or Democratic Officer know. If they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, as this will help with broadband or the Wi-Fi bandwidth. So at least then they can hear and be heard. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into items on the agenda. So the first item are apologies for absence. And as already mentioned, I've got Councillor Liz Burnett and Councillor Mark Wilson. And I think everybody else is here. We've got people in the chamber and we've got people remotely as well. So item 2, which are the minutes of the meetings held on the 11th and the 18th of July 2024. We did have 2 consecutive weekly meetings there. So we've got them as part of the agenda. So I would like to move those minutes. And seconded by Councillor Gwynne-John. So thank you for that. And moving on to item 3 then, which is to receive declarations of interest and the nature of such interest under the Council's Code of Conduct. So do we have any?
No, just to confirm there were no declarations for this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to go into the first of the items on the agenda. It's quite a big agenda today because obviously after the recess we've got quite a number of references which have come from committees as well. So the first one is the Library's annual report, and this is a reference from the Learning and Culture Committee on the 8th of July 2024. So the purpose of the Library's annual report is to provide an overview of how it operates, an evaluation of its key achievements, and an evidence base for demonstrating the positive impact the Council's library services have on our communities and the vital part that they play within that. So I'm going to hand over now to Cabinet Member for Education, and that's Councillor Rhiannon Birch, who should be with us. There we are.
Right, thank you very much. So I'm pleased to speak to this reference. It went to the July meeting of the Learning and Culture Committee and was the last one before the recess, obviously, and it was an 18-month update from the one that previously in December 22. So it was showing all the various things that have happened and the improvements that have been made and offered to the public since the last report. So all sorts of things happening in the libraries, tremendously active, 341, 416 books and digital books checked out, over 17,000 active library users, lots and lots of different activities, many of which were participated in by hundreds of people, 107,000 website visits, 468,000 plus physical visits to libraries, and seeking to engage with as wide a variety of people as possible, different age groups, different needs, etc. Offering early literacy sessions, children's activities, book challenges. There was a summer reading challenge this year, for example, which my granddaughter took part in, as did many hundreds of other children as well. So bringing authors into the libraries to talk, for example, but David Baddiel came in and went to the Memo in Barry and, talked to children and so forth who were brought there as part of library visits. Lots of schools going into libraries. And as we all know, this encouragement of literacy is a really good mechanism for making sure that children enjoy what goes on in school and enjoy reading outside of school, because the more literate a child is, the better able that child is to engage with education. And it's not just about education, isn't it? It's about offering children the opportunity to have something outside of school, such as any engagement with any kind of any form of the written word. And of the other things as well. I mean, there's a Lego club, for example, maker spaces, 3-dimensional printers. I went to see an exhibition in Penarth Library last week, actually, where they had created on the 3D printer a tiny room with miniature books in it, the size of my little fingernail. Bearing how mind how short I am, that's quite a small fingernail. And it was fascinating to see the interest that the children had taken in, making all of these things and putting them out there on exhibition. I felt really enthusiastic about it. So anyway, dementia friendly, stuff like digitising photographs of the Vale and so forth, which is obviously there for future generations, but is also engaging the people who were actually there at the time the photographs were taken. So I can't speak too highly of it. And there are other engagements, such as with Havod Housing, where they have drop-in sessions and so forth. So residents can go in there and ask for advice. We have home library volunteers, an age-friendly environment. I mean, you've probably heard one of our other councillors telling the story about an old lady who goes into Barry Library every day and settles down in the corner, reads the papers, and the librarians make her a cup of tea, because this is where she is safe, secure. It's her warm space. And we think about heating bills. It's a real kind of engagement with different aspects of the community. So I can't speak too highly of the library service. And if you read the report, which is very detailed with lots of good photographs, you can see that it is really seeking to provide the best possible all-round service for people living in the Vale. Thank you. And I'd like you to look at the recommendations, please, at the beginning of the report. Let me just find them. Where have we got? So 2 recommendations, please, which are that the Scrutiny Committee considers the content, notes the progress, and refers any comments to Cabinet. And there were very positive comments from councillors, and even in particular a councillor who not on the committee who turned up in order to make positive comments about the library service outside of his ordinary meeting schedule. So I'd like to offer those recommendations, please.
Oh, thank you, Rhiannon. I mean, it is a really interesting report, and I think, to see I think what firmly shines through is that commitment that people are given to our library services, and the impact, the positive impact that they have, and the vital services they offer really within the hearts of our community. So I'm happy, more than happy then to second those recommendations. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 5. Which again it's a reference from the Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee, 10th of July 2024. And this is around the work to tackle poverty and the current cost of living crisis. The report was sort of co-presented by the Director of Corporate Resources and the Operational Manager for Corporate Strategy and Insight. And I think it really sets out the significant amount of work underway right across the council to tackle poverty and the cost of living crisis. And just reading through the report, and there's quite a lot of detail within that report, but it's really good to see that the impact that this work is having, and also the use of funding from both the council and Welsh Government to support these efforts across food insecurity, warm spaces, and really importantly, in partnership with other organisations, agencies. That partnership work is absolutely crucial for us taking this work forward. You can see that there was lots of discussion at the committee and some really interesting comments and views, and I thank the committee for the work that they've done around that. And obviously there are always queries around sort of funding and additional support. But it's very much, it's an ongoing piece of work, as we know, and something that, you know, is at the very heart of what we're doing about and how we support people. So we have got recommendations on page 3 there. So the recommendation is for is how it's all noted, the comments as well. But we've got a recommendation then back to us as Cabinet, and that recommendation was the committee felt it was important for the Vale of Glamorgan Council to review whether the data it collected provided sufficient detail on how easy it was for residents to access the benefits, entitlements and financial support that the council administered locally, and that this would tie in with the work currently being undertaken to develop the Welsh Benefits Charter, which is actually detailed within the report, if anybody would like to read that, and it is very interesting reading, and its aim of making it easier for people in Wales to claim Welsh benefits that they are entitled to. I think this is a really helpful suggestion and actually complements the work that's underway to ensure people are aware of the entitlements they can gain access to, for example, the pension credit. The Council are continuing to keep a watching brief on the development of the Welsh Benefits Charter and will continue to work in partnership with agencies such as the DWP and the Older People's Forum to ensure that this information is communicated effectively. So I'm happy to move that recommendation. And Councillor Perks?
Thank you, Chair. I am happy to second. If you'll allow, just to highlight a couple of things that we have sort of helped towards. So with the free school meals, there's sort of like within this financial year, there's 100k from the reserve gone there. CAB has also had 20,000 this year, because obviously the work that they do to help our residents within the Vale is crucial. And then the discretionary housing payment that's made, so there's about 50,000 that's gone into that 23-24, and another lot for this year, and that's helping people to stay in their homes where there's a distance between, you know, the rent, the money that they get from universal credit or housing benefits and what the landlord has put their rent at, and it helps people to stop being evicted. So I think the crucial work that's actually done within this is really important to highlight. So yes, I'd like to second, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. I fully endorse those comments as well. Thank you for that. So I think everybody's happy to agree. I don't see any dissent in the room or online. So thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to move on to item 6 now. So this, again, is a reference. I said we do have a number of those today. So this is from the Environment and Scrutiny Regeneration Committee on the 16th of July, 2024. And this is around the Vale of Glamorgan tourism and events. So this report was presented by the council's principal tourism and marketing officer, and then supported then by the operational manager for regeneration. And it presented to scrutiny committee about the latest developments of the tourism sector and events within the Vale of Glamorgan, the impact on the tourism industry had on the local economy, and of course current legislation and how that could potentially impact the industry. So there was a very detailed presentation given to the committee. I did attend in the background as a cabinet member, and it outlined the above areas of interest as well as the following, and I'm just going to highlight a few of those. And we talked about the statistics on tourism for the Vale of Glamorgan, and this is using the tourism research programme. It's called STEAM, which is a tourism economic impact modelling process. We talked about the use of social media and digital platforms, as well as the user-generated content. Highlighted the work around holding events within the Vale of Glamorgan, and the work then within the Events Network and the Event Safety Advisory Group, which is commonly known as ESAG. Filming opportunities in the Vale, which I think is very opportune, that despite the weather at the moment, we've got Gavin and Stacey filming within the town at this present time, of which has generated a huge amount of interest locally and nationally, actually. So that's that's very good timing. It's also about working in partnership with Visit Wales, other local authorities, town councils and local businesses, etc. Again, it's all, this partnership working is so important for us. And also the talk around press and public relations, and then some of those key challenges facing the tourism industry here in the Vale and also elsewhere across the country. And there are some substantial challenges around that. So there was a good discussion took place with the members of the committee, and then the officer as well, responding the best she can. And we talked as well about how we can sort of maximise those opportunities and our place within tourism, because at the moment I think we're pretty much seen as a bit of a day trip sort of a visitor accommodation, visitor place. And we had talks then around about, you know, whether there's further opportunities for more accommodation or, you know, holiday accommodation within the Vale. So there's some really good discussion that took place there. We had quite a long time discussing it, and it was really, really interesting. Now, they did come forward with a recommendation, they wanted the report to be referred to Cabinet in order that it can be considered and that we can be aware of the comments raised by committee on this report. And I do thank the members of that committee for their input within that discussion. It's really helpful for us. And they asked then about the request for information on a greater understanding of the STEAM methodology used for tourism statistics for the Vale of Glamorgan, the resilience of the tourism factor within the Vale, the impact of the new legislation on the sector, and then how we can actually improve internet, Wi-Fi and overall digital connectivity for the local tourism industry, and how Vale residents can participate in that discussion and how they can support local tourism and events going forward. And then obviously is how local tourism industry will be impacted by climate change and how this can be mitigated within it as well. Now, that's come to us for consideration. However, my understanding is that information will actually be provided by council officers directly back to the committee, is my understanding of what was actually agreed at that committee. So I would like to move that recommendation, is that those points that are raised there are investigated by the relevant officers, and then that will go directly back to the committee for their information and potential discussion. So I would like to move that recommendation.
Happy to second, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Okay, so moving on to item 7. So this is the Q4 sickness absence report for 2023-2024. So this has come from the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny, which was held on the 17th of July 2024. Just at the very outset is just really to note the update to Appendix D, which is described within this report actually, and it resulted from a transposition error in the original report where we had some of the figures for sickness absence for the under 65s to the over 65s the wrong way round. So that's actually being amended in the appendix for this report. Now, there's quite a lot of detail within this report, and there's quite a lot of work as well in the appendix as well. Bear with me. Sorry, I'm actually on the wrong page, which is not very helpful, is it? Right, okay, so this report was actually presented initially, but 1st of April to the 31st of April, the 1st of April 2023 to the 31st of March 2024. So that's the period that it actually represents. And then the appended presentation was intended to provide members with an overview of the end of year performance as early as possible. And then this was ahead of the more detailed annual self-assessment 2023, which is going to be reported to Cabinet and full council prior to the publication then in December 2024. Right, so we've got the presentation of the report there. And then the operational manager actually did drew attention to the committee members about the initiatives that have been introduced by the council to support staff, which included support and resources from occupational health colleagues to assist staff in returning to work as soon as possible. And having regard to that, to the paragraph 4.5 of the report, the head of HR and Organisational Development Service advised that the council has now ended its association with the Care, it's called the EAP, is called the Care First Employee Assistance Programme, in relation to providing a 24-hour advice line, and we've actually got a new provider that has been sourced. Now, the new provider, Westfield Health, has commenced with the authority on the 1st of November 2023, and whilst the transition to the service is being carried out, staff could contact or continue to contact the council's occupational health unit with any queries or concerns. And interestingly, then, in referring to the council's occupational health unit and positive health promotion, it was noted that flu vaccinations have been delivered both corporately and in schools and residential settings during October, November 2023. And we actually approximately gave out 2,000 vaccines given across the organisation, which is a really, really good result. So there's a new occupational health booking system. It's currently being implemented with a view to it being rolled out by the 1st of November 2024. And then the new booking system will enable administration time of the nurses and doctors to be reduced, and it's therefore going to provide a more efficient and streamlined process within the occupational health unit. Now, there was a recommendation through to Cabinet, and what the committee has actually recommended to us is that work be undertaken in relation to broadening the reasons for absence in relation to the other box, because there was the discussion around that. Further clarity relating to the absence figures for the 16 to 25 age group and 65 plus categories to be emailed to members, and that's the appendix that I referred to at the beginning. And that a further report be presented to the committee in respect of progress following the commissioning of Westfield Health in 6 months' time. And then that further information be presented to the committee in relation to the service provided by the 30 mental health champions, the good work being undertaken, and to include details of training opportunities. What I would suggest is that Cabinet request our HR colleagues consider broadening the reasons for absence where possible in the other category, if it is possible to do so. The clarification of age ranges is covered in the updated Appendix D figures and attached, and Democratic Services can email those to the committee members. I'm supportive of committee keeping appraised of the arrangements and how these are working with the Employee Assistance Programme via Westfield Health. Happy to endorse that. And I do think that the Wellbeing Champions do an excellent job in supporting colleagues, and will be interested to see this presentation to committee in due course. And so therefore I would like to move that recommendation.
I'm happy to second, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Okay. Now we've got references 8 and 9. So now these refer to the annual delivery plan monitoring report, Q4 performance 2023. So both of these references, or the references have come from the Learning and Culture Scrutiny Committee and the Corporate Performance and Resources. Now, this is actually, I've actually got this on the agenda under item 14. So what I propose to do is to take those references alongside that main report then at item 14, if we're happy to agree that.
Happy to agree,
Yeah.
Chair.
Lovely, thank you. So we'll come back to that one. Okay, so I'm going to move on to, I'm just going to have a quick drink. So I'm going to move on to the item 10, which is the corporate risk Q4 update, proposed new risk register and revised risk management policy. And this is a reference that's come from the Governance and Audits Committee, which was held on the 18th of July 2024. Now, this report to Governance and Audit Committee presented three aspects of risk management. The end of year position for the risk register, proposed new risks for the register for 2024-2025, and changes to the risk management strategy. So there's a fair bit of detail with that, and again, I'd like to thank members of that committee for the discussion that took place, including topics around social care, Project Zero, and things around, items around the risk register. So we had a good, well, there was a good discussion actually took place at that committee by members and obviously the lay members as well. So I'm going to move to the recommendations around that. So the committee noted the Q4 position and endorsed the new risk register and policy, but subject to the following. That Cabinet be advised of the views of the Governance and Audit Committee, the views being that procurement should be included as a standalone risk. Cabinet be asked to reconsider the status of Project Zero and whether it warranted a catastrophic status. Then for the social care risk to be assessed as to whether one overall risk is appropriate, and for further consideration around the definition of risk regarding cause and effect as related to in paragraph 2.1 of the new policy. I would suggest that officers be asked to scope out the procurement risk as a standalone risk, reflecting the forthcoming changes in legislation, and that this will be considered by the Strategic Insight Board, Strategic Leadership Team, and if deemed sufficient, to be reflected on the risk register. But this is a good suggestion. The committee have previously asked for the reconsideration of the status of the Project Zero risk as to whether this should be catastrophic. Now, the risk considers to be kept under review by the Project Zero board, and I think that's really important that it is, and would suggest that this continues, and then, which is also then informed by the data on the council's carbon emissions, and that those emissions then have actually just been submitted to Welsh Government and the carbon management plan that Cabinet are considering on this agenda a bit later on as well. And consider the very high risk rating is sufficient at this point, but that Cabinet will ask Office to review this again in light of that data above once we receive that. There are two social care specific risks proposed for the new register, one relating to demand and capacity, and the other to the new social care IT system. This is considered to be appropriate for the social care specific risks. However, members will also note that the other proposed risks on the register around financial resources and workforce also reflect elements of risk for the Directorate. So, as a package to this, seems a very appropriate way to consider the risks being faced. And then lastly, I would be supportive of asking officers to review the definition of risk with some further clarity and to simplify this in the new policy, which I believe is already underway. So I would like to move those recommendations.
Happy to second, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to move on. You'll all be sick of hearing my voice in a minute, won't you, for this one? Okay, so I'm going to move on to item 11 on the agenda. So this is another reference from Governance and Orders Committee, 18th of July 2024. So this is the Q4 progress against external regulatory recommendations and proposals for improvement. Now, this is actually a housekeeping report to Governance and Audit Committee, and it sets out the progress being made against the recommendations made by our regulators, most notably Audit Wales. At Q4, positive progress has been made in responding to our regulatory improvement areas. Of the 52 actions ongoing in the Strategic Insight Tracker, known as SIB, 90% of actions, of which number 47, have been attributed a green performance RAG status, 8% for an amber status, and 2%, which is which is a red status. Now, again, we had a recommendation, which I've just completely lost. Okay, bear with me. Right, just got to those now. The committee has actually recommended back to Cabinet that the Council's progress to date in addressing existing recommendations and improvement proposals made by the Council's external democratic references Cabinet on 240905, reference from Governance and Audit, a Q4 progress against external regulatory recommendations, regulators, as outlined in the appended end-of-year Strategic Insight Board Insight Tracker be noted, and that the comments then from Governance and Audit Committee be referred to Cabinet, including its endorsement of the removal of completed actions from the Strategic Insight Board SIB Tracker, Insight Tracker. So I would move that we suggest noting and endorsing the views of the Governance and Audit Committee, and I welcome the progress and approving the completed actions be removed from the tracker, and that Cabinet committees continue to have oversight throughout the year. And I'd like to move that recommendation.
I'd like to second, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's the end of the reference, bar items 8 and 9, which I'll be taking further on the agenda under item 14. So I'm going to move on to item 12, which is the minutes of the Glamorgan Heritage Coast Advisory Group. So we've got those in front of us. They always make quite interesting reading, and it's really good to actually have a look at the work it's ongoing all the time, but it's only when we see the minutes we actually understand and realise the work that has been taken around the Heritage Coast. I mean, for instance, I had no idea about shore dock plants, and when I read that, I thought that was really interesting, and about the introduction of those around the heritage, and that 2 sites have actually been identified for those, and Cwm Mawr and Cwm Bach. So I find items like that really interesting, because it's sort of, it's how they actually grew them at the Botanical Gardens, and 10 are staying at the Botanical Gardens, and the rest have actually been distributed around suitable places, and those 2 areas have been identified and they have been planted. So that is really interesting. So I don't know if anybody has got anything to add to that, but otherwise I'd like to move those minutes.
I'd like to second, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on now to reports of the Executive and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources, but Liz, as I said, Liz is not here today, so I'm afraid you're stuck with me presenting those reports on this occasion. Okay, so I'm going to move on to item 13. So this is the draft Vale of Glamorgan Council Annual Self-Assessment Report for 2023-2024. Now, the basis of the report is actually set out then in the executive summary, and which is actually quite long in details. I'm not going to read all that out. You'll be happy to know. But just to sort of highlight that the report actually draws on a wide range of information sources to assess the progress made by the Council in meeting its annual delivery plan commitments for 2023-24. And these are aligned then by the Council's corporate plan wellbeing objectives. And the findings then will enable the Council to identify how it can further enhance its internal processes and use of resources to improve and support achievements of its annual delivery plan commitments and the corporate plan 2025 wellbeing objectives. The self-assessment report is a requirement for all Welsh authorities under the Local Government and Elections Act. And it's, you know, the aim of this is to sort of keep our performance under review and then consult on and publish a report setting out the conclusions of its self-assessment once in respect of every financial year. So as I said, the executive summary then gives a detailed précis, which is a bit of an anomaly, of the content, purpose and structure of the report. And I think it might be just worth drawing attention to that actually this is the draft of the annual assessment, self-assessment report, following a comprehensive process to look at progress made against the annual delivery plan for the last year. And I think it's important to note that this is an assessment of performance against the Council's ADP and our use of resources, and this is being brought to Cabinet for approval to now consult on this. And I welcome seeing further information on how residents have been engaged with and consulted, referenced throughout the assessment, and that also members have helped inform the presentation and content as well. The report will be consulted on widely, including via all scrutiny committees and the Governance and Audit Committee, who have a strategy role in this process too. So on that, I'm going to move to the recommendations. So recommendation 1, that Cabinet reviews and endorses the draft Vale of Glamorgan Annual Self-Assessment Report 2023-24 as the basis for consultation as described in this report. And recommendation 2, that Cabinet refers the draft Vale of Glamorgan Annual Self-Assessment Report 2023-24 to the Governance and Audit Committee, which is going to be held on the 23rd of September 2024, and all scrutiny committees between the 9th and the 18th of September 2024 for their consideration as part of a programme of consultation, with any views and recommendations for changes to the judgments or proposed areas for future focus being referred back to Cabinet for the 10th of October 2024 for their consideration prior to the final Vale of Glamorgan Annual Self-Assessment Report being considered by Governance and Audit Committee, Cabinet, and thereafter presented for endorsement by full Council. And I'd like to move those recommendations.
Just before the seconded, I'd just like to bring your attention to page 85 in the report. I'm singing the praises of my service at this time because I'm pleased to see that the increase in users of our leisure centres from 406,353 in the previous year up to 741,551 this year. Additionally, there were an increase in membership, a monthly fee of from just over 4,000 last year to 505,575 this year. So it's a big improvement, which I'm delighted with, and I would second.
Okay, thank you, Gwyn. Just note that we've got no dissent and everybody's happy to agree those recommendations. Okay, I'm going to move on to item 14, which is the Annual Delivery Plan Monitoring Report for Q4 Performance 2023-2024. And obviously this will include the references then that we've got under 8 and 9, which came from the Learning and Culture and the Corporate Performance Resources Committee. So this regular report complements the previous report, the self-assessment report, as the performance against our annual delivery plan, and is one element of the annual self-assessment report, as considered then in the previous agenda item. It is being reported separately, and I think this gives Cabinet a timely overview of performance at the end of the previous year. And then we've got the executive summary there, which is on pages 1 over to 2. And so you've got the presentation there as well. And I think in addition to that executive summary of the overall good performance against the plan, I think it may be useful to draw attention to paragraphs 2.18 and 2.122, which provide a summary of the views of the scrutiny committees, as this then informs the decision regarding recommendation 2. So we've got a couple of recommendations there. So the first one is that Cabinet considers quarter four performance results and progress towards achieving the annual delivery plan 2023-2024 commitments as aligned to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's corporate plan wellbeing objectives. And then that Cabinet considers the views and recommendations of scrutiny committees in relation to quarter four performance and approve identified remedial actions as the basis to address areas of underperformance and to tackle the key challenges identified. And then this then will actually incorporate then that we note or take into consideration and note the comments from the 2 scrutiny committees. And my understanding is that they're fed into this now. And this, if I'm right now, this is going out to the scrutiny committees. No, got that wrong. They've been to scrutiny committees, that's right. So, and it's, that's it. Okay, so I'd like to move those recommendations.
Happy to second, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm now going to move on to item 15. So this is the, bear with me. This is the Carbon Management Plan, 2024 to 2030. So this is the Council's 3rd Carbon Management Plan. The first was published back in 2008 and the second in 2018, which is just a year ahead of the Council declaring a carbon emergency. This latest plan very much reflects on the greater appreciation of the challenges we face. And I think it's just worth noting that we're at the midpoint of the United Nations Decade of Action. And whilst climate change has been recognised for many years, for many it felt a long way off, but we're actually halfway through that time. The publication of the plan is driven by legislation, but its needs is so much greater. The Paris Agreement in 2015 set a target to limit long-term temperature rises to 1.5 degrees centigrade, but that threshold has been quickly reached, and more recently, global temperatures have risen for 13 successive months. And I think, you know, we can see that just in the changes in our weather, changes in nature, and how that is impacting. And it is quite sobering when you actually look at this. And it's such a huge topic. And I think if you look at the whole as a whole, I think it can become quite overwhelming. But I think this really is about our part and that we can play in that as well. So this 3rd plan has a great scope, as well as covering the 5 ways of working, which is long-term integration, involvement, collaboration and prevention. It is very comprehensive, and whilst the development has been coordinated by the Decarbon Energy section in our corporate property team, it has input from across the organisation. And just to clarify then, it covers all activity with a carbon footprint, which includes then buildings, street lighting, fleet, business travel and staff commute, waste, supply chain, renewable energy and land use. So each section within the report sets out the context, the carbon emissions, goals and actions for each of these activities, and it is well worth. It's a lot of reading, there's a lot of detail, but it is really interesting reading there. And then in line with that, there will be regular monitoring and reporting on the progress of those. So I believe the council has the right ambition in striving for zero carbon for its activities by 2030, but this plan alone won't get us there. And you know, those are the points that I highlighted earlier. It has been estimated that it would cost around about £50 million to achieve zero carbon in our buildings alone, which just represents 11.3% of our overall carbon footprint. And that's huge. That's a huge number. But I think it reflects, you know, a lot of our buildings are aging and they were built at a time when, you know, issues were looked at, you know, differently, and materials. The supply chain, which represents 78.5%, and the majority of our suppliers are not bound by the same 2030 net zero targets as the council is. However, the council will continue to push on delivery via goals and actions which are set out in the carbon management plan and Project Zero challenges, and also by reviewing existing and developing new policies to assist with the reduction of our carbon footprint. And this is as far as possible within the resources available to us and by seeking out external funding opportunities. So I've got 3 recommendations. Recommendation 1, that Cabinet notes the progress made to date with actions from the first 2 iterations of the Carbon Management Plan. Secondly, that subject to agreement of Recommendation 3, Cabinet considers the content of the Council's 3rd Carbon Management Plan 2024-2030 and agrees to its adoption as described in the body of this report and associated appendices. 3, that Cabinet refers this report and appendices to Corporate Performance and Resources Committee for their consideration, with any views being reported back to Cabinet for final consideration. And I would like to move those recommendations.
I'd like to second those recommendations, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Bear with me when I go. Okay, so moving on to item 16. So this is for noting, this is actually the use of the Chief Executive's emergency powers. And then it's to advise Cabinet of the exercising of emergency powers by the Chief Executive since the last report in July 2024. There are quite a number there, and they're all laid out within the report, and includes lots of sort of repairs and around sort of schools, putting on roofs that, you know, it's timely then because of the school holidays, so giving the opportunity to do that work. And there's things like housing upgrade to internal communal areas. And I think quite importantly, the Aubrey House internal and external refurbishment project, particularly in light of, you know, this is probably our only high rise, when I say high rise, compared to some other places around the country. It's not high rise, but it's probably the tallest that we've got within our social housing within the Vale. So it's the works that are being done around that. Things like a new roof on the Flying Start building on Scoma Road, because they're awarded funding from Welsh Government. And as I said, there are several, and there's the boardwalk at Cosmeston Country Services and the locations there. So, and obviously the road improvement works at Porthkerry, which are quite vital because they need you doing. So they're all laid out there in the report, and others as well. So there are quite a number for this report on this occasion. So I just move that we note the use of the Chief Executive's emergency powers as laid out in the report.
I'm happy to accept, second that, sorry, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to item 17. So this is the capital monitoring for the period 1st of April to the 30th of June 2024. So this report gives an update of the progress on the capital programme between the 1st of April 2024 and the 30th of June 2024. At the time of writing, the approved programme totalled 139.927 million, and this includes the budget slipped from 2023-24 into the 24-25, of which that amounts to 15.013 million. If all the requests within the report to amend the capital programme are approved, the revised forecast outturn is projected to be £134.989 million. And then spend to the end of June is £8.805 million. So Appendix 1 details the financial progress on the capital programme as at 30th of June by the scheme, and then Appendix 2 sets out by directorate the changes from the approved budget of final proposals in March 2024. The movements in year, including slippages and additions, and demonstrates the journey to the revised forecast outturn for 24-25. It is important to note that many areas are continuing to experience an increase in costs associated with the delivery of schemes. Tenders are being received over the current allocated budgets, and officers are reporting the requirement to renegotiate submitted tenders. And I think this is a trend that's been, happening for quite some time, and is actually happening in the outside world, outside the council as well. Schemes are being closely monitored throughout the year to identify overspends, and slippage of 4.902 million has been requested in this quarter's monitoring. So officers will continue to work with project managers and sponsors to ensure value for money, and that all possible funding opportunities are identified and are fully explored. The report details recent delegated authority requests that have been approved, and also notes the use of emergency powers, which are detailed in Appendix 1 to the report. Two schemes have been highlighted, which are being delivered in the 24-25 capital programme. Firstly, external funds of 3.708 million have been secured for transport grants from Welsh Government, and 2.102 million of this is for active travel schemes. Secondly, the report highlights Section 106 money that's been received from funding a scheme, which is funding a scheme, at Celtic Way Park and play area in Roos, which I know something is that local members and the community have been pleading for quite some time. So the report requests to make several amendments to the current capital programme, and some of those larger amendments I'm going to highlight now, which is the reprofile of Band B Ysgolyderi and the 2024-25 and future years capital programme, the removal of an early years and childcare scheme at St Athan for 450,000, and the inclusion of a new scheme for Parkwood conversion of C1V for 400,000. So I'm going to move now to the recommendations, which are on page 2. Is recommendation 1, that Cabinet notes the progress made on delivering the 24-25 capital programme. 2, that Cabinet notes the use of delegated authority as set out in the report. 3, that Cabinet notes the use of emergency powers as detailed in Appendix 1. And lastly, Cabinet approves the following changes to the 24-25 capital programme and future years capital programme. So A, Band B Ysgolyderi, reprofile this scheme budget as set out in paragraph 2.15. Early years and childcare, St Athan, remove this scheme budget of 450,000 from the 24-25 capital programme. Ysgolor include new scheme with a budget of £10,000 in the 24-25 capital programme, and this will be funded from the school's revenue budget. Jenner Park Primary, so it's merged the schemes listed in paragraph 2.11 in relation to Jenner Park Primary, roof renewals and lighting protection on the 24-25 capital programme, and this will create one scheme called Jenner Park Primary Roof Renewal with a budget of £355,000. Victoria Primary Boundary Wall, carry forward the scheme budget of £14,000 into the 25-26 capital programme. Rondell House Day Service Improvements, so the proposal is to via £5,000 from this scheme budget to the Residential Homes Fire Door Scheme in the 24-25 capital programme. Parkwood C1V conversion. So the request is to include this new scheme with a budget of £400,000 in the 24-25 capital programme to be funded £200,000 UK Government Shared Prosperity Fund, £100,000 from Parkwood contribution, and £100,000 from the Reshaping Risk and Investment Reserve. And then lastly, Disabled Facilities Grant via £300,000 from this scheme budget to the new scheme for Discretionary Adaptations Grant, and that's detailed then in paragraph 2.14 of the report. And I'd like to move those recommendations.
I'd like to second those recommendations, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 18. So, and item 18 is the Q1 revenue monitoring for 24-25. So this report sets out the position to the end of June 2024. So included in the report are some small variants requested to correct the opening position as well. So as we know, there are significant pressures across schools, additional learning needs, children's and adult social services, and homelessness. And these largely reflect a continuation of the pressures emerging from 23-24, such as pay and inflationary pressures, significant incidence of complexity of additional learning needs, increasing incidence and complexity across social services, and increased homelessness. So the homelessness pressures have been mitigated in year by increased Welsh Government grant, and therefore the planned drawdown from the Housing and Homeless Reserve will be reduced. Across the services, inflationary pressures are also being experienced in respect of pay, most notably where market forces are being utilised, and for the future and for the funding gap between provision for the 24-25 pay award and the likely pay award for 24-25. The council only allocated very limited contractual inflation as part of the 24-25 budget, and no general inflation for some years, and this will then have a general impact on the resilience of the revenue budget. Delays of implementation of savings will also impact the 24-25 outturn across services, and this is in part due to the time required to effectively implement savings of this scale, but also reflects the capacity within the teams. So challenging savings and efficiency targets have been set out for 24-25, and this includes a target of 7.676 corporate savings. So the progress against these savings targets is reflected in the appendix and summarised in the report, with 76% of 24-25 savings projected to be achieved or mitigated in year. In the context of these significant sustained service pressures, an unplanned use of reserves is currently projected to be approximately 13.629 million. And of that, 4.309 million relates to schools. Now, the council has various work streams progressing to mitigate the unplanned use of reserves and reduce in-year overspend, such as the schools budget task force, with particular work streams around consideration of all schools contract and agency spend, additional resource to accelerate the delivery of savings, controls on new recruitment and non-essential spend, and then directors are working with service accountants to manage the unplanned drawdown of service reserves, and then also the review of use of grant expenditure. So this unplanned use of reserves will significantly reduce the reserves available by the 31st of March 2025, and the projected position is set out in Table 3, with reserves reducing to 50.645 million, which, as you can see, that takes us down to quite substantial use of those reserves. So I've got two recommendations: that the position with regard to the authority's 24-25 revenue budget be noted, and secondly, that Cabinet approves the environments requested as part of this report, and I would so move.
I'll second, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Everybody's happy to agree? No dissent? Lovely, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the last of my reports, which I'm sure you'll all be glad to hear the sound of my voice finishing. So this one is item number 19. So this is the Q1 Treasury Management Monitoring 24-25. So the revised SIPFA codes of practice published on the 20th of December 21 now requires the Council to report to Cabinet quarterly in respect of its prudential and treasury indicators. So I'm going to talk just about the prudential and treasury indicators to start with. So this report details the changes in the capital programme since last reported to Cabinet and updates the prudential indicators to reflect these changes. So all the changes fall well within the limits set of the Treasury Management Investment Strategy. Now, when it comes to borrowing, the Council has, where possible, been self-financing new capital expenditure and maturing debt. However, available balances reserves are now practically exhausted, and the Council are now starting to borrow externally from the Public Works Loan Board. So due to current high borrowing costs, the Council are borrowing shorter term for 5 years, in a hope that rates will fall during this period. In the period under review, the Council has borrowed 5 million to fund the Housing Revenue Account, commonly known as the HRA, as currently there's a project rate available 60 basis points below the standard rates. And then, as of the 30th of June 2024, the Council's external borrowing was 148.058 million, which is up from 143.312 million as of the 31st of March 2024. However, this amount falls well within the within the authorised limit and operational boundary indicators set for the year. And then to finish that bit, then the borrowing costs in the first quarter of 2024-25 were 4.84%. With regard to investments, in the first quarter of 24-25, the Council's investment portfolio increased marginally from 34.195 million as of 31st of March 2024 to 36.32 million as of the 30th of June 2024. The average rate of return for all investments was 5.31%, and that was over Q1 24-25. No investments were placed in Treasury bills as more favourable investment opportunities were available to the Council. And I would just like to add on, because obviously this is quite a complex report, there's an awful lot of detail in there, awful lot of understanding. But what I will, as has been mentioned previously, we are looking to hold more Treasury management training for members to actually help them gain that understanding and the complexity around this Treasury management monitoring. So hopefully that will be coming forward soon. Okay, so I've got two recommendations on page 2. So first, that Cabinet notes the Q1 monitoring report for Treasury Management 24-25. And secondly, that the Q1 monitoring report for Treasury Management 24-25 be referred to a Governance and Audit Committee, as I'm sure they will enjoy going through that with a fine tooth comb. So I'd like to move those recommendations.
And I'd like to second, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so you'll be pleased to know that you'll be having a rest from listening to me now. So I'm going to hand over now to the Cabinet Member for Education, Arts and the Welsh Language. So this is item 20, which dispose of an additional education land at the rear of St Iltyd Primary School in Lantern Major. So Rhiannon, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you for that. I'm afraid it's going to be a very short, straightforward report. As you've heard, it's land at the rear of the St Iltyd's Primary School in Lantern Major. It has parts of it have been sold to residents whose gardens back onto this land in previous years. We've had another request. This land is unused, so there is no reason why this land should not be disposed of like this. The school has been consulted, and what we would like you to do, the recommendations are that the additional disused land is declared surplus to the council's requirements, that delegated authority is granted to the head of finance, the section 15 officer, to dispose of the land, which is on the plan at Appendix A, by the appropriate means in consultation with the Director of Learning and Skills and the monitoring officer and the head of Legal and Democratic Services on terms and conditions to be agreed. And that we as the Cabinet authorise the monitoring officer and the head of Legal and Democratic Services to prepare, complete and execute the appropriate legal documentation required to dispose of the site at the appropriate time. So if I could have a seconder for those recommendations, please.
And I'm happy to second those recommendations, Rhiannon. And
Thank you very much.
Yep, I think everybody else is in agreement. Thank you. Okay, and move on to item 21. So this is a report of the Cabinet Member for Leisure, Sport and Wellbeing. So this is the repurposing of the former C1V call centre into new recreational opportunities in partnership with Legacy Leisure. So I'm going to hand over to Gwyn.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader. Following the relocation of the Council's Contact One Vale C1V service to the civic offices, an opportunity to use the former C1V call centre located in the former Bowls Hall in Barry Leisure Centre has been explored, and the Council's leisure management partner, Legacy Leisure. Legacy Leisure have secured funding of $200,000 from the Shared Prosperity Fund to refurbish this area for recreational use, and needed to match this with a further $200,000. The match funding has now been secured via Legacy's own resource and a further contribution from the Council as part of the Investor Save initiative. The Council will make savings by immediately re-letting this area to Legacy Leisure, as costs such as NNTR, which currently stands at $26,695, which we're paying as a council on that. The security and utilities would need to be met if the area remained vacant. However, the main objective for the area is focused on providing more recreational space in Barry that will lead to more physical activity opportunities. A supplemental lease is required for the former C1V area of Legacy Leisure to formally accept the funding they have successfully applied for and requires cabinet approval. Just let me explain to remind you that Legacy Leisure's, the contract from Parkwood, and Legacy is their trust. Parkwood Leisure's was a 10-year contract from 2012 with a 5-year option of an extension. We took that option up, which took us then to 2027, and we then extended that contract up until the 31st of December 2029. So that is where we stand with Legacy Leisure. So in addition, Cabinet are also being requested to grant the Director of Environment and Housing Services authority to negotiate any other agreements required to deliver this project due to tight timescales contained within the Shared Prosperity Funding offer. Such agreements may include, but not limited to, an early access licence and other agreements to start work. A match funding amount of $200,000 will be required to supplement the grant. $100,000 of this funding will be provided by Legacy Leisure, with the remaining $100,000 being made available from the Council's Reshape and Investment Reserve. The costs of the Council managing this area currently is in the regions of $50,000. Therefore, the payback period on the Council's investment in this case is around 2 years. I have the following recommendations this afternoon to offer you. 1, the Cabinet supports the repurposing of the former C1V call centre into usable recreational space in partnership with Legacy Leisure for the benefit for both residents and visitors as detailed in the report. 2, that the Director of Environment and Housing Services, in consultation with the Head of Finance and myself, the Cabinet Member for Leisure, Sport and Wellbeing, be authorised to negotiate the terms for a supplemental lease of the former C1V area to Legacy Leisure to the end of December 29. To agree terms and conditions to allow early access under licence for the required works to progress in advance of the completion of supplemental lease, to vary as required the leisure management agreement between the Council and Legacy Leisure, to reflect the additional space being encompassed within the existing agreement. 3, that the Director of Environment and Housing Services, in consultation with the Head of Finance and myself, the Cabinet Member for Leisure, Sport and Wellbeing, be authorised to negotiate with Legacy Leisure any further permissions, early access agreements, etc., if required. 4, that the Monitoring Officer, Head of Legal and Democratic Services, be granted delegated authority to complete and execute all necessary agreements associated with this arrangement. And finally, 5, the use of the urgent decision procedure as set out at Section 15(14) of the Council's Constitution be agreed for recommendations 1 to 4. Thank you.
And I'll second those recommendations. Thank you very much. I think everybody's in agreement. We've got no dissent with that, so thank you. Okay, so number 22. So this is any items which the Chair's decided are urgent, part 1. I've got nothing under item 22. And then I've also got nothing under 23, which is any part 2 items which are urgent, and I've got nothing there. So I think all it leaves me with now is to say thank you very much for your time and to close the meeting. Oh, beg your pardon. Okay.